Hey, Everyday Wellness listeners. If you enjoy this podcast, I know that you will love my friend JJ Virgin's Ask the Health Expert. She is not only a mentor and friend, she is also a 4-time New York Times bestselling author and fitness expert who offers real, relatable expert advice in key areas with guest experts, including people talking about fasting, bioidentical hormones, nutrition, mindset, exercise, adrenal and thyroid health, all topics that I know my own listeners are super interested in. There's without question one of my favorite podcasts to listen to on a weekly basis. She drops episodes Monday through Friday, and she's also been an expert on my podcast. She was on episode 112, Your Body is Not a Bank Account. There is so much alignment in our philosophies, and I know you will enjoy it thoroughly. Definitely check it out. Ask the Health Expert.
This is Everyday Wellness, a podcast dedicated to helping you achieve your health and wellness goals and provide practical strategies that you can use in your real life. And now, here is your host, nurse practitioner Cynthia Thurlow.
Today, I'm so excited to have Lara Adler with us. And she and I were talking before we began recording, and I started in motion last year after taking one of her courses that this was going to come to fruition because on so many levels, our listeners need this information. I say this from my perspective. I'm a allopathic, Western medicine, functionally trained nurse practitioner. I think I'm pretty savvy. And there was a lot of information that I myself did not know. And this is going to be one of those episodes that I think is really important to share with your loved ones. Make sure you listen to it a few times, take actionable steps. So let me give you a little bit about Lara's background. Lara Adler is an environmental toxins expert and educator and a certified holistic health coach who teaches health coaches, nutritionists, and other holistic health practitioners how to eliminate the number one thing holding their clients back from the results they are seeking. Largely the unaddressed link between chemicals and chronic health problems. She helps train practitioners to become experts in everyday toxic exposure so they can improve client outcomes without spending hundreds of hours researching on their own. Welcome, Lara. It's so good to be connected with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to come and chat.
Absolutely. So I think it's important for the listeners to have an idea of the scope of the issue. And I think people are oftentimes very surprised to learn that even though we're in the United States, and yes, we have these federal agencies that are designed to protect consumers, there's not a whole lot of protection going on. So let's kind of start, where from the beginning, like where the scope or the magnitude of the issue really stems from. I know that there's many reasons, but I think it's important for people to understand just from the perspective of what is designed to help us. And then, we need to go beyond what is currently available to be able to look even more closely at things we're exposed to in our personal care products, our environment, and our food.
Yeah, I think the big misconception that people have, and understandably they have this, is that the federal government has policies in place that are protective and that products wouldn't be for sale in the marketplace if they weren't safe. Like that's just the general assumption that people have. And certainly there are some checks and balances, like people can't, we have, I don't know if everybody remembers the famous Tylenol tampering case. I think that was in the early 90s, late 80s or early 90s. And all the Tylenol came off the shelves and, so there's things like that. So I don't want to say that there's no protections because we do have the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which, they're the ones that do product recalls. If there's your jacket toggle is going to get caught in the door of a school bus. I remember that from the 90s. That was 80s or 90s. That was a thing. And so, or, lead paint in Thomas the Tank Engine toys. We do have some recall, but that's coming from just specifically the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and they're handling consumer products. They don't handle things like pesticides, herbicides, those kinds of sort of more widely used products and chemicals in the marketplace. So I think the first thing to understand is that in the United States, we have really weak policy that regulates chemicals in commerce. And if you talk to somebody from the chemical industry or manufacturing industry, they'll probably tell you the opposite, that regulations are too restrictive to do business. But that's just kind of the song that they sing because they're trying to defend their marketplace. and their place in the marketplace, and their ability to sell products and make profit. And so the reality is that we have industry is very heavily involved with government in the writing of the laws that ultimately protect industry over the consumer. And so, it takes us decades to pass legislation that's supposed to protect us. So we have the Toxic Substances Control Act, which was first passed in 1976, and it took 40 years, 4 decades, for that policy to get an update, to get a major update. And that happened in 2016. So it took 40 years. And the reason it took so long is because of industry influence and the sort of partisanship that kind of worked its way in. But this is a nonpartisan issue. Why? Because all people are exposed regardless of your political party. And yet it became a very heavily partisan issue. And so, if it's taking us 40 years to pass an update to our primary policy that regulates chemicals in commerce, not even all chemicals in commerce, just the chemicals that agency oversees or that policy oversees, you can start to see what's happening in the marketplace we're not guaranteed safe products. We're not guaranteed to not be harmed by the products that we're encountering. And then certainly another layer into this, and this is an aspect that I just find fascinating and infuriating, is that, people look at the United States as being this very litigious society, right? Like if you don't like it, sue us, right? And so corporations bank on that mindset, right? That, if something is bad and something is harmful, like we'll find out real fast because people will sue us. But I don't know how many people that that have tried to go up against a large multinational billion-dollar company like a SC Johnson or Johnson & Johnson or whatever it is and win. Right. And so companies know that the little guy isn't going to be victorious. They're not going to have the funds to actually go after them. And they rely on that to kind of keep things copacetic for them. And so I can probably spend an hour just talking about that kind of dynamic that we're in. But the bottom line is that chemicals are not required to be tested for safety prior to going to market. There are no strict requirements that say that. We have hundreds of thousands of chemicals in circulation globally. The vast majority of those have never been tested for safety, and certainly not the kind of safety testing that is reflective of our actual exposures, right? So there's safety testing data that exists for a small percentage, like 2%, if less, the chemicals in commerce. And even that data is not necessarily representative of the chronic low levels of exposure that people are experiencing every day.
I think you described it best, this kind of Goldilocks effect that it's, this cumulative exposure. Like people will say, well, I'm a guy, I just use bar soap, I use shampoo, I brush my teeth, I use deodorant. I use 5 products a day, but it's the cumulative impact of all of those chemicals in each one of those products over time. Yeah. And I think for so many of us, we don't think about our skin as being an absorbent organ. We just think, I slather myself.
As an organ.
Exactly.
We don't even think of it as an organ, but technically it is. It's the largest one that we have. And, I think a lot of people will toss out statements like everything you put on your skin is absorbed into your body. And that's certainly not true. Like, there's plenty of products that are designed to sit on the surface of the skin. That's how makeup works, right? There are products that are designed to penetrate the skin. And then there's other, ingredients and products that aren't intended to go into the skin, but they do just because of their molecular size. And so, we don't absorb everything, but we do absorb a lot of chemicals and compounds that we put on our skin. And not all of that is bad. But in the cases where it is bad, we should pay attention to that and we should explore that. And that's really the work that's happening in the field of environmental health that is starting to explore, what are the repercussions of, these chemicals showing up in people. And I think an interesting thing for people to understand is we can't test chemicals directly on humans. That's not the way it works. There's ethical standards. That's not how science research happens. We do, however, test on animals. And so in this realm where we're in a situation where we can't directly test chemicals and see what would happen if a human being was exposed to this chemical every day for its life for 80 years, what would the impact be? We wouldn't do that ethically. B, nobody's committing to an 80-year longitudinal study, right? Like that's not happening. And so we do rodent studies, and then we have to draw inferences between animal research and epidemiological data that is looking not for necessarily health effects, but they're looking for levels of chemicals and associations between chemical exposures and certain illnesses or outcomes, both positive and negative. And so we do see that when we look at that animal research and then look at the epidemiological research, we see a lot of parallels, and that gives us the data that we have or the information that we have to say, maybe we need to be approaching things differently in terms of our chemical regulation. But then we go back to the first part of the conversation, which is we're butting up against industry that's pushing really, really, really hard against any movement in that area.
So I'm curious, was there something that occurred for you or a loved one that got you started on with a desire and an interest in this area? Because obviously, a lot of it can be very scientifically dense, as you're diving into this research and diving into especially epidemiological studies. This is not stuff you sit up with, late at night. I mean, you really do have to have all your mental faculties aligned to be able to absorb what you're reading. But was there an issue? Did something crop up? Was there a family member who got harmed, or just your genuine interest? I know you describe yourself as a science nerd, which I love because I love to understand the why behind the how. But was there one thing in particular that kind of cropped up that developed your interest in this, or you just kind of fell into it?
There wasn't. I think a lot of people in the health space come to their area, their little niche, because either they or a family member had an issue, and I didn't have that. I didn't. I kind of grew up in a teenage 20s culture of like kind of damn the man and like, that whole vibe where like let's stand up for the little guy, let's right some wrongs kind of ethos. And, when I started learning about this topic, which really happened kind of accidentally because I was working as a health coach and I had clients. I didn't really have a very clear niche in my health coaching business. So I was just kind of working with people casually, typically around weight loss. That was kind of an easy area. Most of my clients who sought me out for that, they had results, they did all the things. And then I had like a couple of clients who also did all the things, but their weight didn't really budge and they were frustrated and I was frustrated. And so I started looking at, what am I missing? There's got to be something I'm missing, because like they clean up their diet, they're drinking the water, they're sleeping, they're doing yoga, they're, minimizing their stress, they're whatever it was. Like they did all the things that worked for everybody else. And that was really where I kind of cracked the door open into this whole area of environmental health. And like, wait a minute, there's things that we're unknowingly exposed to. They're not things that we're doing, right? It's not choices that we're making that I'm going to eat this versus that, or I'm going to exercise or not exercise, or whatever. There were just things that we're passively being exposed to, and some people certainly more than others. In that case of that sort of deep dive into the literature was linked to metabolic issues that led to insulin resistance, diabetes, weight gain, resistant weight loss. And I was like, wait a second. Like at that point, I'd already been I'd been researching and reading about nutrition and kind of wellness superficially and just for myself. But at that point for like a decade. And so I was like, wait a minute, like, why is this kind of the first time I'm hearing about this? I'd gone to a health coaching school, and for a year-long program, it was not mentioned. None of the practitioners that I spoke to knew anything about this. And so that kind of was unfolding. And then at the same time, my sister-in-law was pregnant with my niece. She's now 12. So that's always my yardstick for my measuring stick for how long I've been in this space. And I started researching what are the products that, like a baby's crib mattress, like let's start looking at what are the issues. And I was horrified. I was horrified at the chemicals that were being used in products for babies. And then the more that I started digging into just products for everybody, it was really this feeling of this is not okay. And it's not okay that people don't know about this, and not okay that people aren't actively talking about it, because the secrecy around it is what keeps it being perpetuated. It's what allows companies to get away with knowingly putting carcinogenic chemicals in products, putting chemicals that are known or even suspected to be reproductive toxins and toxic to our most vulnerable, which are infants and babies still in the womb. And so that, like, I just kept thinking, how do these people sleep at night? Like, what is wrong with people that they're so willing to put profits over people? And so it was that outrage, honestly, that really was the steam that moved this engine along. And I quickly realized that, like I said, all of the health professionals that I spoke to were like, I don't know anything about this, and I feel like I probably should. And so I spent 2 years really making sure that I understood, doing all the research, going to all the conferences and lectures and symposiums and, talking to scientists and doing all the things that I knew that was in my skill set at the time to really understand this topic so that I could kind of spread the word to health professionals. And that's been happening since 2012. So, and what's great is that this dialogue has expanded so much in that time.
Well, I'm so glad that you had, the circumstances that developed this passion and this interest. And I think there's a lot in what you stated that I want to unpack. There's a degree of cognitive dissonance. And for people that listen to this podcast or other podcasts that I've done or other people's podcasts or read things, sometimes it's very hard to understand that there are individuals in this country, other countries, it's not unique to the United States, that are more interested in profitability over safety. And so that's number one. I think number two, sometimes it's really hard to wrap your head around. So we're not suggesting anyone that's listening that you have to change everything you're doing right away. It could just be one thing if you take one little nugget from this podcast that you're ready to do, one little thing that has a huge impact. And then, number three, I too, I left clinical medicine 5 years ago and developed this business. And almost instantaneously, I started attracting women about the same age that I was that were really struggling with weight loss resistance. And so I always refer to it, the analogy of it's like peeling an onion, that, sometimes people, they remove inflammatory foods, they sleep better, they manage their stress, and boom, the weight comes off. Other people have to do 5 other things. And then there are people who really still are doing all the right things. And I believe everything they're telling me fervently. And we've checked all the labs and we've done stool studies. I mean, we've done all the tests. And it's this type of nuance. It's these exposures to toxins that are oftentimes what most people are not having an honest conversation about. And so that's why I'm so very grateful that you're here today. And what I was thinking might be most helpful for listeners let's focus on, because there's so many things, like I could bring Lara back and talk to her for hours and we will definitely make that happen. But what I thought would be most useful today would be to talk about endocrine disrupting chemicals. And I'd love for you to explain a little bit about what these are, because there are probably some people saying, yeah, I've heard of that, I might recognize, but other people are saying, I've never heard of this before. What are those? And even if you are really careful and conscientious, you are exposed to these things on a daily basis. And so let's unpack what they are and identify examples, and then we can talk about what they actually do, because you were already starting to allude to some of what they do with the hormone disruption.
Yeah.
But I think it's particularly important for women who are, struggling with weight loss resistance, in particular, people who are trying to get pregnant, are pregnant, have young children, people that are at my stage of life where I'm done having kiddos who are now teenagers. And, we're focusing on different things. We've got all these hormonal fluctuations, but let's talk about these group of toxins, because I think this is particularly important for the listeners.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably, I would say, one of the biggest and most important areas. And there's so much research on endocrine disruption at this point. There's still lots we have to learn, but there's a lot that we know. So the endocrine system is our hormonal system. It's not just sex and reproduction. It's everything from digestion and whether you're hungry or full. It's your mood, it's your energy, it's development, it's reproduction, it's body temperature. Your endocrine system regulates all the things, basically. And so interference in that system, as kind of logically assume, is that it would cause some downstream problems there. And so this class of chemicals that it's known as endocrine disrupting chemicals, there's about 1,000 of them that are identified as known or suspected to be endocrine disruptors. My hunch is that number will balloon exponentially as we do more research. As I mentioned, we've only really started to examine a tiny fraction of the chemicals that are in commerce. In the United States, we like to say there's like 84,000 chemicals in commerce. We don't actually know that the accuracy of that number. We used to say that there was about 150,000 chemicals worldwide. A new analysis, I think that was published just this year, discovered that we're actually closer to 350,000 chemicals worldwide. So there's a lot. And so because we've only looked at a small pocket of them, like I said, there's about 1,000 of these endocrine disruptors. And then there's subclasses. So there's chemicals can be endocrine disruptors and also be obesogens, diabetogens, like that. And those obesogens is sort of origin of what I started looking at. But these endocrine disrupting chemicals can block or mimic our natural hormones in our body, or can interfere with their synthesis or their metabolism. They're kind of like masquerading as our natural hormones, and they can turn on or turn off, things in that body that maybe shouldn't have been turned on or shouldn't have been turned off, and then cause all these downstream effects. And, what's really challenging is, a single endocrine disruptor like BPA, which is one of the ones that people tend to be most familiar with. As I like to say, it has the most street cred because people see it, labels BPA free all the time. And we can talk about that in a minute, but is that, these chemicals are ubiquitous. One, so we're all being exposed, but two, a single chemical like BPA has so many different endpoints of potential impact. And we can't say for a given person, you were exposed to BPA, you are going to end up with this symptom or that symptom. We don't know yet what the outcome is going to be. We can see here's the menu of things that we think might likely result from exposure to BPA, or that BPA is linked to or associated with, but we can't say, you were exposed to BPA, therefore you're going to have this outcome. So, that area of research is still kind of in the dark. We don't know that yet. And I think that uncertainty is part of what industry, frankly, relies on. Mm-hmm. Right? They're like, well, we prove it. And then we're like, we can't prove it exactly. But again, we can look at those rodent studies, we can look at epidemiological data and make strong cases for. But I think that part is challenging. But going back to the sort of general topic of endocrine disruption, is that we have these low levels of exposures day in, day out to these chemicals that are bioactive in the body, meaning they're doing things, they're turning things on, they're docking in our estrogen receptors or what have you. They're bumping iodine out of our thyroid, which we need for, optimal health on all levels. And, most people will come and say, but the amount that's, of this exposure that we're getting is so small, it doesn't really matter. And that's the sort of the company line of industries that use endocrine disrupting chemicals. The amount in our product is so small, it doesn't matter. Well, if that was the only exposure that somebody was getting, right? If they only got that one exposure from that one product one time, sure, not a problem at all, no big deal. But that's not the reality of human exposure. The reality of human exposure, to your point earlier, is that, some guy might be using 5 products, some woman might be using 10 products, a teenager might be using 20 products, right? They use more products than anyone. And those are just personal care products, right? We're not looking at laundry detergent and household cleaners and home fragrances and whether or not you're driving with one of those Christmas tree air fresheners in your car, right? So we're not exposed to one single product. We are exposed to hundreds of products all day, every day. So that's sort of one point to keep in mind. The other point is that our body is naturally designed to be responsive to really minute levels of hormones in the human body. That's how the human body works. The hormones that course through our veins are doing so at extraordinarily low levels, like parts per trillion levels, really, really tiny. And the way that I like to say it is that our hormones are communicators, they're messengers, and that they communicate in whispers.
Yes.
Really quiet, really little amount, really, really, really little. And, you've ever either for people that have gone through puberty or have had children that have gone through puberty or gone through menopause, like they don't feel like insignificant. Those are not giant fluctuations. Those are relatively small fluctuations in hormones that cause these like major fluctuations in how we experience life during those times. And so we know that the body is extraordinarily receptive and responsive to these really tiny levels of hormones because that's how our physiology is evolved. And so when we have similarly low levels of exposure to these chemicals that interfere with hormones, it logically makes sense. And we see this, out in animal studies, that the low levels of exposure that we're getting, these parts per billion, parts per trillion levels of some chemical in your drinking water or some chemical in your shampoo day in, day out, those chemicals are bioactive in the human body at those levels. And the body can't tell the difference in a lot of cases between a molecule of, say, estradiol and a molecule of BPA because they're almost the same. And so this is where this idea that, endocrine disrupting chemicals are really concerning at all levels of the human lifespan. They are most damaging. They are most concerning during fetal development. And I would even say backed up before that when it comes to conception and the ability to conceive, right? Because a lot of these chemicals interfere with the health of sperm counts, of, egg health, of all of these different factors in human fertility. And then this sort of most vulnerable, which is the developing fetus. That's like, it's building a Lego set. And imagine somebody coming in and taking out a bunch of Legos or throwing in some other Lego pieces that are like, faulty. You can't undo that structure once it's built, faulty as it might be, because of this endocrine disruption. And so this really is the most vulnerable population. And what I think is fascinating and makes sense given disease rates that are happening in children right now. Childhood obesity has tripled since the 1970s. We're seeing all kinds of, whether it's learning disabilities, behavioral problems, all of these different things that are kind of ticking up in children, is that there is this concept called, got a couple different names. FEBAD is one of them, this fetal basis for adult disease or fetal origins of adult disease, which states that it is that what's happening in the womb during fetal development that can actually set you up for increased risk of disease in adulthood. So you were talking earlier about, there's some people that just struggle with losing weight. It's entirely possible, and we've seen this in rodent studies, that they were exposed unknowingly by their parents while they were in utero to these obesogenic chemicals that can alter their fat cell production or alter their bodies in ways that predispose them to gain weight, even given the same caloric intake as somebody who maybe was not exposed. And so that might explain some of those differences, why somebody can eat whatever they want and never gain a pound. And then you've got somebody who looks at something wrong and then they just, put on 5 or 10 pounds. But so that's sort of the gist with endocrine disruption, is that these small doses really matter, more so even than some of these large doses, which our toxicology field really looks at those high dose exposures. And so we can certainly talk about that end of the conversation as well.
We believe our physical and emotional health is directly tied to what we eat. Plan to Eat was born from a desire to eat real food, great food prepared at home together as a family. My hope is that Plan to Eat will be a tool to help you prepare a delicious, wholesome food that nourishes both body and soul. Meal Plan with Plan to Eat helps reduce costs, reduces time spent planning and shopping, helps you to eat better food, and allows you to have an answer for what's for dinner. I have teens, and that is one of the most common questions I get on a daily basis. Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, create a meal plan around your schedule, and then the software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. There's a full-time support team that is available to help you get started with an account and answer any questions you might have. Normally, Plan to Eat only has one sale each year, but for everyday wellness listeners, we are offering a special 20% discount on a yearly subscription. Sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/EWP and the coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. Again, that's sign up for your free trial at www.plantoeat.com/EWP.
This is Cynthia Thurlow. Are you ready to conquer intermittent fasting? My intermittent fasting masterclass, affectionately known as IF45, is a 45-day online program designed to teach you everything you need to adapt intermittent fasting as a permanent lifestyle. This is an education-based, science-backed program taught by a leading intermittent fasting expert, which would be me. This intermittent fasting masterclass delivers the why, what, how, and when once and for all, so that you do not have to spend hours scouring the internet only to find contradictory advice from underqualified influencers. So if you're ready to invest, you want to head to www.cynthiathurlow.com/IF45. That's www.cynthiathurlow.com/IF45. I'd love to have you join us in our next class. Well, I think it's really invaluable for people to understand that these exposures can be cumulative, and that's important to understand that, we have hormones in our bodies that are designed to play a particular role unless they get dysregulated, either due to lifestyle choices, the way we eat, the lack of sleep, too much stress, the things we're exposed to in our environment, food, personal care products. And so there can be a lot of information. And I love that you kind of touched on the epigenetics. So obviously things that we're exposed to through our parents, during my nutrition training, we talked about Pottinger's cats, meaning, if you're looking at generations or lineages of certain cats, and people are going to say, why are you talking about cats? And the point is that there were certain phenotypes of cats that the healthy cats, were derived from, cats that ate a particular type of diet, more nutrient dense, and then other cats who ended up having a lot of health problems who ate very differently. And so there's so many variables that impact how we're able to be flexible with our health or our weight. I also think about, there's lots of studies, as I know, about just the changes in bacteria in our gut can impact how many calories will be broken down and utilized. And so there's on so many levels, I use the term multifactorial, so many reasons why this can happen. But you mentioned and touched on BPA. And I think about my biggest association with BPA, when I had younger kids, it was with bottles because bottles. And it was BPA free, which I later learned is crap and garbage anyway. It's not any better. But I also think about receipts. Every day you go to the store and you get a receipt, and 99.9% of the time I say, no, thank you, unless I genuinely need it. And then I have a little plastic bag, which isn't ideal, but then I don't have to touch it. And then if I need to scan it, it's scanned. But what are some of the other more common obesogens that you can think of? I always think about phthalates, which is spelled no one ever spells that word right. I jokingly say it's if they could have just spelled it with an F and not a PH. Would have been
a little bit easy. PHTH. What other words start PHTH?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So BPA certainly is a big one. It's one of the most common chemicals in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. It's expected that 93% of the population has BPA metabolites in their body at any given time. And, and I'll continue down on that list, but I'll pause here and say, and this is true for phthalates as well, is that some of these chemicals that we're exposed to they're non-persistent. They don't build up in the body. We might be exposed to them a lot, but they don't build up in the body. So there's other chemicals, like lead, which deposits in our bone. That's a lifetime store of lead in our bones. There's, PCBs, dioxins. There's these fat-soluble, persistent chemicals that are really, really hard for the body to get rid of. Those are problematic on a whole nother level. But these non-persistent chemicals like BPA, like phthalates, like organophosphate pesticides, that's another one that we can talk about. These are non-persistent chemicals. And so the body knows how to metabolize them pretty well and breaks them down, and you pee them out. And so some people are like, oh, well, that's the body doing what it's supposed to do, which is great. It's true. And the short amount of time that these chemicals are in the body, they can still have an effect, a negative effect, right? So they can come in, flip a bunch of switches, and then peace out of the body. So they're problematic on their way in and on their way out. But what that tells us in terms of their short transit time is that when we reduce exposures, right, we can actually have a meaningful impact on the long-term levels of these chemicals in our bodies to some degree. And so I like to preface this because, it's a little overwhelming for people when they learn about this stuff. So there is a sort of light at the end of the tunnel. I like to kind of frame it that way. So yes, BPA is certainly one of these endocrine disrupting chemicals that's also classified as an obesogen. Not all obesogens are endocrine disrupting chemicals. Not all endocrine disrupting chemicals are obesogens that we know of. So BPA is one, phthalates are another. Phthalates are, again, spelled PHTHALATES. To slap the person who decided to come up with that phthalate ester name. And so phthalates are another ubiquitous chemical. They're suspected to be in 98% of at least the US population. And these are found both in soft plastics and in fragranced items. So perfume, shampoos, household cleaners, laundry detergents, scented candles, air fresheners, all of those products that are so commonplace. Most people have some or most of these, fragranced items. My next door neighbors, I have to close my windows when they do their laundry because their smell of their detergent and their dryer sheets is so pungent. It will wake me up out of the sleep. I don't know why they sometimes do their laundry at literally 3 a.m, but I have had to wake up and close my windows at like 3 a.m. because I can just smell their dryer sheets coming in. So all of those products most of those products will utilize phthalates to make that fragrance formula stick around longer and be persistent, because they want that to be persistent. And so, when we see advertisements for laundry products that have these like scent release beads that will extend the amount of time that your laundry will smell like the product by weeks or months, I'm just going, well, you've just jacked up the amount of fragrance and the amount of phthalates to extend that. And so phthalates are ubiquitous within scented products. That's all our personal care and household cleaner products. And then they're also found, like I said, in soft plastics. So if we think in particular, anything that's made of PVC, so whether that's a PVC backpack, a raincoat, your shower curtain, your kid's Halloween mask, a garden hose, these are all typically made of PVC. And so if we think of PVC's polyvinyl chloride, we think of a PVC pipe. In order to make that pipe soft and flexible, phthalates are added to add that sort of resiliency, that component to that type of plastic. And so those phthalates will migrate out very, very easily into their surrounding environment. So for example, shower curtains. People, such a benign, why are we talking about shower curtains? But shower curtains are that plastic smell that you're smelling. Those are phthalates. And we don't want to use those. It's just an unnecessary exposure. And so phthalates are well-established endocrine disruptor and obesogenic chemical. We have, I mentioned, organophosphate pesticides. This is the newer class of pesticides. Used to be organochlorine pesticides. These were highly persistent and were building up. This was the whole DDT, thinning of, eggshells for eagles and birds that really Rachel Carson brought to the world's attention in the 1960s with the publication of her book, Silent Spring, which is hailed as the book that really kicked off the environmental movement. She was a woman way ahead of her time who was silently battling cancer while fighting this big fight. So she is a hero among humans. I really believe she was just a brilliant woman. Anyway, so she really rang the alarm bells about that. And because of that, we kind of decided as a society to let's find a better replacement for those really persistent toxic chemicals. So we did take action there and we swapped them out with organophosphate pesticides. So no organochlorines, yes, organophosphates. They're way less persistent. They're not really less toxic, right? They're differently toxic. And so those are also chemicals that we're being exposed to. Primary exposure source is through food, right? Is through the consumption of conventionally grown fruits and vegetables. Obviously, if people are utilizing lawn and garden pesticides that they're buying at Home Depot. You're getting a major additional source there. If somebody's working occupationally as a landscaper, as an agricultural worker, they're getting an absolutely enormous amplified level of exposure. Those are occupational exposures that are really, really concerning. But these are, again, this non-persistent chemical that we can actually significantly reduce our exposures to as individuals through the purchasing of organically grown foods. And there's been like at least 5 or 6 studies at this point that have sort of repeated these same findings, which is often an argument. Oh, you can't reproduce the findings, except that they have many times at this point. That when people switch from a conventional diet to an organic diet, they can drop the circulating levels of pesticides being excreted in the urine by 80 to 90% in 3 to 5 days.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, and it's like that's sort of this sort of light at the end of the tunnel, right? Mm-hmm. Like we can have a meaningful, measurable effect on the levels of chemicals that we're bringing in by not bringing them in. Now, I'll say, because I think this is an important whole other facet to this conversation, is that there are millions of people in this country and elsewhere around the world that don't have access. They can't afford organic food. They can't afford the non-toxic skincare. And that's a whole other dynamic of this conversation. So, I'm cognizant as I give these recommendations for people to make lifestyle changes to minimize their exposures, that some of these recommendations are not accessible to all people. And that is really where we need to be more vocal advocates, in the same way that, like, you had little kids and baby bottles was the big source of BPA. The reason why that was BPA, not the other bisphenols, because BPA is just one in a family. BPA was actually banned from use in baby bottles was because moms were like not having it. Mm-hmm. And they it was called the stroller brigade, and they rolled their babies up onto the lawns of Congress and their state houses. And what politician is going to say no to a bunch of moms with babies? That's and so they really used their power in the marketplace to demand change. And so in addition to serving our own best interests by minimizing our exposures in the ways that we can, I think we also really need to fight and advocate for stronger policies that will protect those that don't have the access to, buying organic food, for example.
I think that was a beautiful explanation. I think it really is important that those of us are a voice for all individuals and not just advocating for, where we live geographically, but acknowledging that there are people who don't have the ability to make all those decisions seamlessly. I trained in inner city Baltimore, and I remember one of the projects that we were always working on with the kids was trying to, instill gardens that the kids could be involved in, because for example, in the inner city, people's access to food is oftentimes the hyper palatable, highly processed stuff in a corner market. And when I say market, it's not like the market that we're thinking of. And so really instilling that joy and that love for actually getting their hands in the dirt and, allowing something to grow and just being cognizant that, I never want to just advocate for just my own children. I want to make sure that we're advocating for all the kids or all the, young adults or all the young women that are, for example, and this is again, kind of a tangential comment, but when you're thinking about as women start menstruating and, they're considering, becoming sexually active and they're considering options for contraception, and just acknowledging that not everyone has the ability to go buy organic tampons or a Diva cup. Right. It's okay, we need to come up with workable solutions for everybody, because, it needs to be as equitable as we can make it, or at least have manufacturers providing more options than just the bleached cotton that's, right. Anyway, we could talk just about that.
Yes, that's a whole other facet that I think is important. And going back to the pesticides, right? So doing our best to minimize our exposures there. There's so many other areas of exposure to these endocrine disrupting chemicals. And in an attempt to kind of make at least the parts of this conversation as equitable as possible, is the lens that I really am looking more closely through is getting people to start where it's free and where it's easy. That's kind of my tag in this, or the way in which I want people to approach this is, it's not about, like you said, it's not about going in and like getting rid of everything all at once. It's not about like throwing out your furniture and ripping up your flooring and like doing a home remodel. Like that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about making small but meaningful changes lifestyle wise that can help to lower. You're never going to eliminate your toxic exposure. We've long passed that point. We can't do that, but we can minimize it in meaningful ways. And I'll give you an example of in meaningful ways. So in research around fertility, where they're looking at levels of chemicals like BPA and phthalates in women that are undergoing IVF treatments, the women that had the highest levels of exposure to, say, for example, phthalates, were significantly affected by or had lower fertility rates. And the women that had the lowest levels, not none, just the lowest levels, didn't have those same fertility hurdles that women with a higher level. So our goal is not zero, our goal is less. That's our goal. And so I thought that specific research kind of shines a light on the reality. We're not looking for zero. We're just looking to get as low as we can, because that's where we can kind of start to see a positive impact. And so we want to start with the things that are free and easy that everybody can do. And so the first of those things for me is always just ditch, just throw out, just donate it, just throw it out. The scented candles, the air fresheners, the reed diffusers, the plugins, the Febreze, home air freshener products, those are all filled with phthalates. They're also filled with other chemicals, VOCs, things like benzenes, which are carcinogenic. And they're significant indoor air pollutants. And so just don't buy them. This can be challenging because people they're so attached to their home fragrances and their scents. And I get that can be challenging, but I encourage people strongly to just start minimizing it and then go without. Even if the scented candle isn't being burned, if you can smell it, it's entering your body. The fastest way for a chemical to enter your body outside of injection is via inhalation. It goes right into your bloodstream. So let's focus on those ones that we're inhaling. And on the same token, the next thing that people can do that's free and easy is open your windows, right? So we build our homes to be really energy efficient, which is great from a energy standpoint, but it's terrible from an indoor air quality standpoint. And that really took place in the 1970s. That started being a build trend in the 1970s because we had the OPEC oil embargo. So everything all of a sudden became about energy efficiency. And then our homes started to be built really, really airtight. And what that means, or the impact that has is, most of the materials that we bring into our homes, off-gas chemicals, your floors, the paint on your walls, your furniture, especially if it's that cheaper particle board, MDF furniture. Our kitchen cabinets are often made of this stuff. Our flooring is vinyl or laminate flooring. And all of these materials, not even factoring in the scented candles and the air fresheners, are off-gassing. And if our homes are really airtight, then we're trapping all those chemicals in. So, and we know this, the EPA has found that indoor air is actually 2 to 5 times worse than outdoor air. And it can go up to 100 times worse, especially if somebody's doing a renovation or they're painting. That indoor air quality, technically, if it was a workplace, would violate OSHA standards in a lot of cases, right? And so, but there's nobody that regulates indoor air because it's individual private property. And so opening your windows is a great way to just kind of let that stuff out and get some fresh air in. Even if you're in a city that has air pollution problems, you don't have to leave them open all day, 10 minutes a day, it's fine. So opening your windows, taking off your shoes when you come in the door, really simple. Anybody can do this. We're not just trying to avoid the dog poop that we may have stepped on, but if we went to the park or if your neighbors are using pesticides on their lawn, you are tracking that into your house. If you have carpets in your house, then those carpets are kind of trapping all those things. So just get into the habit of taking your shoes off. It's really, really simple. And then, from there, we're really looking at making small investments, maybe swapping out your plastic storage containers. We talked about BPA and phthalates. Those two chemicals are often present in our food storage containers, like whether it's leftovers or the squeezable bottle of ketchup that we, just bought. So we want to start really minimizing plastic, and especially plastic in the microwave. We just don't do that. Move it into a glass bowl or a plate, ceramic plate and stick it in the microwave if you're going to use that, but don't microwave in plastic. So that's another simple thing that people can do to minimize their exposures to some of these endocrine disrupting chemicals, these obesogenic chemicals. And then from there, it's cleaning up your food in whatever ways you're able to. It's cleaning up your personal care products, your household cleaners, your cookware. So I'll tell you, I've been doing this for 12 years, 10 years professionally, 12 years personally, and I'm still always making changes. There's no goal here. It's a journey. There's no destination in place. This is just always learning and always making different choices as you are able to. And, if it takes a month, takes a month. If it takes a year, it takes a year. If it takes 10 years, it takes 10 years.
I love Thrive Cosmetics. And this is why Thrive Cosmetics is freaking amazing. Their products are made with clean, high performance, skin loving ingredients. Their clinically proven formulas not only highlight your best features, they actually improve your skin over time. And most importantly, they're formulated without junk, no parabens, sulfates, and phthalates. They never test on animals, and they're Leaping Bunny and PETA certified as 100% vegan and cruelty free. My favorite product is the Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara. It actually mimics the look of lash extensions without the damaging effects of glue or expensive salon prices. Now, the other piece about Thrive Cosmetics that I love is their bigger than beauty mission. How for every product purchase, their commitment is to supporting nonprofit partners with a donation of funds or products is truly unique and inspiring. You're going to love them as much as I do. Visit thrivecosmetics.com/EWP for 15% off your first order. This is an exclusive offer you can only get here. That's Thrive, CAUSEMETICS.com/EWP for 15% off your first order. thrivecosmetics.com/EWP. Is something preventing you from achieving your goals or interfering with your happiness? Check out betterhelp.com/EWP. It's been my experience as a nurse practitioner and a clinician that there are oftentimes not enough resources for mental health, not only for my own patients, but in even talking to family and friends. And BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist in a safe and private online environment that is super convenient. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they can make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. And best yet, the service is available for clients worldwide. I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/EWP. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/EWP. I think that's kind of slow and steady message is important for people to understand. I know that, when I went from, I thought I ate a pretty good diet to getting more conscientious about the foods I was eating, and obviously the foods I was cooking and bringing home, I adapted much more easily than my husband did. Now he's fully on board, but there were definitely specific things. I'll give you an example. Seed oils was one of the things that my husband, he had to read about it, go do the research. And as an engineer, then he was like, okay, checkbox, I can commit to that. One thing in our house, and I'm sure it's probably no different than anyone else's, we have no nonstick pans anymore, but I know that was really hard for my husband, who likes to make omelets and wants to flip the omelet, wants to do all these fancy things when he makes said omelet. Nonstick cookware, I think we've all been conditioned that this is ease of use, which of course it is. But I think what many people don't realize, and again, this is but one example, the nonstick surface you end up actually ingesting. So as it's breaking down, you're ingesting those chemicals into your own body, which is disgusting. It's like, oh, the nonstick surface is worn off. I'm like, oh, it's because we've been eating it.
Yeah. And I think also, and those chemicals are concerning. So those are called PFAS chemicals. They're in our drinking water. They're major environmental pollutant. They're referred to as forever chemicals. So though they don't break down. They biopersist in our bodies. They build up. They're hugely, hugely problematic. If people want to learn more about this, they can go to Netflix and watch The Devil We Know documentary. They can go watch Dark Waters, which is a film with Mark Ruffalo that is based on the same story that the Dark Waters documentary explores, which is this DuPont's production of these nonstick chemicals that they've known about for decades causing health effects, and they suppress that information and were polluting drinking water of people living in Parkersburg, West Virginia, that ended up developing all types of serious and fatal illnesses. And so it's a pretty shocking yet common occurrence when it comes. So it's a common representation or good representation of what often happens behind the scenes when we're looking at chemicals and their health effects and the lengths that industries will go to protect their profits over people. Yeah. So it's a real eye opener. But those PFAS chemicals, like, yes, I never advocate for nonstick cookware. I think it's a hard no for me. And nonstick cookware is not actually our most significant source of exposure to those chemicals. Those exposures are more likely, even though I still want people to swap them out, right? Because they're not good to utilize, not only for ourselves, but when we're disposing them, we're still contributing to the manufacturing process, to the harming and pollution of, different communities, often communities of color or low income communities where these factories are situated. And so it's not just about protecting our health. This is also my argument for organic food. It's not just about me. It is about all the farm workers. It is about all the agricultural workers that are being exposed at really high levels and then bringing those exposures home to their children and their families. And so we're getting exposure to PFAS chemicals through food packaging, through, our pizza boxes, our microwave food containers, any kind of paper that utilizes or that's going to be in contact with a wet, hot, or oily food. They need to make that paper waterproof, or grease proof. So microwave popcorn, big exposure source to PFAS because the entire inside of that bag is lined or coated in this PFAS chemical. We're also being exposed through our stain-proof sprays. So I see folks with the stain-proof sprays for their boots to keep their suede nice. Those are typically PFAS chemicals. Even, and I don't have confirmation on this, but I don't see how it wouldn't be PFAS chemicals, Rain-X, which is that, buy it at the hardware store, you wipe it on your windows so that the water beads off. It's great. It's super helpful, but it is a hydrophobic liquid that is very likely just PFAS chemicals. And then we're also being exposed through our drinking water. PFAS is found in firefighting foam. So if you live near an airport, if you live near a military base, military is one of the largest polluters in the world, unfortunately, with various chemicals that they just dump into the groundwater and pollute communities and environments. And so PFAS chemicals we're being exposed in lots of different places. But yes, ditch the nonstick. My favorite recommendation, I'm a cast iron girl, but now I'm a cast iron and carbon steel girl. And so carbon steel has the same properties as cast iron. So it does require the same kind of babying that cast iron does, meaning you can't let it soak, you can't let your food sit in it, you have to, coat it with oil before you put it away, that kind of stuff. But it's really lightweight, it's very, very thin. So one of the objections with cast iron is it's really heavy. So carbon steel is if you think of a traditional wok, it's really thin. It's thinner than stainless steel. It's really thin and lightweight. Now carbon steel, and sometimes it takes a while, but you can get your seasoning. It has a smoother finish than most cast iron. Okay. And it also is so lightweight that you can flip it. So you can flip an omelet and you can have a fried egg slide off. I had one this morning on my carbon steel pan and it just slides right out, just like a nonstick pan would. It does require some cooking skill and it does require learning how to season and utilize those pans. So it's not as lazy as a nonstick is, where you don't have to have any skill. You just crack your egg and it's there. And so I think that if people can put in a little bit of effort to learn how to use these pans, how to actually cook properly, don't put cold meat into a hot pan, that kind of stuff, you can achieve fairly nonstick finish with much safer materials.
Oh, well, you've given me certainly something to think about. I want to be mindful of your time, and I'm actually going to absolutely positively bring you back because we could have gone in so many different directions.
Oh my gosh, yes.
When just touching back on the personal care products, I've always kind of sent people to environmental working groups website, to Skin Deep, to kind of plug in products. When people are looking at, cleaner deodorants, cleaner lotion, like I usually recommend people start with like toothpaste, and, I give them a couple things to think about because it's just too overwhelming to change them all. And for full disclosure, it took forever for me to go from antiperspirant deodorant to just deodorant, because I was convinced by the lovely, the processed food industry and the big ag companies that sweating was a bad thing. And now I think about it, it makes me laugh. I'm like, your bodies are designed to sweat because it's a way that we detoxify. But I know people oftentimes are very fearful to switch out to a cleaner product because they think they're going to stink and they think that it's not going to be effective. And so what are some of the ways or resources that you usually send people to? Because that will probably come out of this podcast. People will be asking, what do you use? What do you like to use? What are your resources? So I'm preemptively going to ask that question before it comes.
That's great. And it is overwhelming. And so the first resource I'll point to is my own website, because I've curated a bunch of sort of shopping guides for folks of products that I've personally vetted that I think are good. And there's like 10 categories: skincare, beauty care, makeup, hair care, oral care, feminine care, like cookware, all the stuff. So that's a shortcut where people can go. There's also, at least when it comes to personal care products, there's a couple of really great stores. I link them on my skincare and beauty care pages on my site. Stores like the Detox Market, like Credo Beauty, because what these companies have done is essentially created a marketplace where they have vetted, dozens of brands that have stepped into this sort of clean beauty space. And I'm using air quotes there because it's a really unregulated phrase or concept. And so there's lots of different interpretations. And there's a lot of what's called clean washing or greenwashing that happens, where companies are like, no, our products are clean. And then but according to who? And so there's a lot of sort of disingenuous marketing that's happening out there, which is why I like companies like the Detox Market or Credo Beauty or Folane is another one, because they're vetting these products and saying like, these are our standards. And these are the chemicals that we don't want to see in the products that we sell. They're not always 100% perfect, but as I mentioned earlier, like I'm not picky about perfection. I'm not. I just want people to be doing better, making better choices. And so those stores are a great resource. They've got, all of the personal care products for men and women that you would need. And that's really where I tend to point people. I don't actually tend to point people to the environmental working groups databases, because I think most people truly find them to be overwhelming. And while you might find products there, you won't find those products in a store. Right. So then you have to go through all of these hoops to jump through to be like, well, I found a product that's great. And but now I have to figure out where to buy it. And or maybe they don't sell direct. And well, they're not at my local co-op or my local health food store. So now I'm back to square one. Right. And so I think, and they've kind of worked their way out because they've got the EWG verified. That's sort of the same concept as like Detox Market. So there are resources out there. I think those are, the ones that I mentioned. People can hop over to my website if they just want the shortcut, like here's the basics that I think, people need. But I don't want people to feel overwhelmed, because when people are overwhelmed, they don't do anything, right? They're kind of frozen in action. And, even if the action is small, like I said, if it's ditching the scented products in your home, if it's opening your windows, just start there. And then if you're at the place where your deodorant or antiperspirant runs out, and you need to buy a new one, then you can switch to a better product. You don't have to go and throw out the products that you have. That's money that you spent. You can utilize them. If you feel like throwing them out, great. But otherwise, just use them up. And then when you're ready to replace them, you can go to one of those resources and say, let me try this deodorant, or let me try that line of shampoo, see how they do. And keep in mind, and I think this is a challenge for a lot of people, especially when it comes to deodorants and hair care specifically, is like everyone's body chemistry is different. So not every product is going to work the same for every person. And the same thing with hair. Everybody's hair is different. Is it oily? Is it dry? Is it textured? Is it straight? What's the climate that you live in? And so the one shampoo product isn't going to work for anybody. And I have tried some bad shampoos. real bad shampoos. Companies send me products all the time to try. And I'm like, sure, great. And there's, been a handful where I'm like, yeah, I can't, I'm sorry. It just didn't work for me. And it might work for other people, but it was a no for me. So like there is an experimentation process when you're looking to swap out particularly personal care products until you find the one that works for you. So I think prefacing that for people going in, I don't want them to try one product and be like, this doesn't work.
Yeah. And I think the emphasis on bio-individuality, acknowledging that we all are very unique individuals. I can tell you that I have, despite having very fine hair, I have a lot of it. And on the East Coast where the humidity is out of control right now, this time of the year, I tell people all the time, I'm like, all bets are off in the summer. I'm more often than not, my hair's in a ponytail and it's the only way it can be controlled because otherwise it's like the size of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you mentioned your website, but I would love for you to share with listeners how to connect with you. You have a great Instagram account. That's actually where we initially got connected. Let listeners know how to connect with you. Obviously, I want to bring you back. There are so many rabbit holes we could have gone down, including just the water issue alone. Yes. I was telling my husband the last couple of weeks, I've been doing your water course. And I was telling him, I said, now I'm completely paranoid. It's like, we're moving to a new city. And I'm like, we have to get our water tested. And he was like, oh boy, here we go. So,
here we go. Do you know the number of husbands that hate me?
No, I don't think, what I would say to you is, so I'm married to an engineer who is someone who is a very reasonable person, but sometimes it's like moving a mountain. But the seed oil thing, as an example, it took him a long time, but now he's 100% on board. And like he tells me when I go to the store and try to find a chip, because I have teenage boys and I'm a realist. I mean, they're not going to not eat a chip. I'd rather they eat a cleaner chip. And how few products don't have seed oils in them, whether it's a cookie, a cracker, a salad dressing. He now reads those labels. So once he's on board, he's 100% on board. So I don't think it's so much that husbands get kerfuffled. I think it takes them a little longer to come around. I think maybe the women were like, oh my gosh, sound the alarms. We need to be, aware of this. There's some danger amongst us. We need to be aware. And then the men kind of go, I need a little more time to kind of like process this.
Yeah. I have a good friend who's doing a home renovation and she was like calling me from Home Depot and I could just hear her husband grumbling in the background. And I was like, I'm sorry, Pat. She asked, I can't not answer the question. Do with this information what you will. But so people can jump over to Instagram and they can find me there at Environmental Toxins Nerd. There's tons of information and resources there. I work primarily with health professionals, so my content is, mostly geared towards them, but you don't have to be a health professional to benefit from what you learn. And then, my hope also is just that for students of mine like you who take in this information, that you then become the resource for folks who are looking for, guidance and support on these topics. So either my Instagram, people can come find me there, or just at my website, which is lauraadler.com.
Well, thank you again for your time. And as I mentioned earlier, I will definitely be having you back. There's so many different topics we could have dove down. And I think this is really important information. I think, for so many people, this might be the third time they've heard it, the 10th time they've heard it, but to have everything organized in such a way that makes it accessible and makes it non-frightening, because that's one of the things that I think is critically important is that, if you have a platform, a website, a podcast, if you can share good information, educate and inspire people to make, positive life changes, that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Wellness. If you loved this episode, please leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and remember, tell a friend. And if you want to connect with us online, visit the link in the show notes.